Good afternoon. I just want to touch on something that Chris said right at the beginning of the afternoon when he was talking about new and how we often say disrupt instead of doing something new. I wasn't doing anything new in this. It is nothing new for me to be a grumpy bastard on the internet. But what I was doing was sitting at home. It was the 4th of July. I have no great emotional attachment to that date. I'm not American. I'm not as much of a pyromaniac as Chris's introduction suggests I might be. I was just watching some television and, as you might do, reading a bit of Twitter. Saw some tweets from this man, local minor internet celebrity, Dan Sumption. He's been involved in some really great projects and says an awful lot of exciting things on the internet. And he was tweeting some large corporate Twitter accounts. And he was saying, hang on guys, you advertise in the news of the world. Have you seen the news today? Have you seen what those buggers have been doing? What they've been doing is not just listening to the voicemail messages on Millie Dowler's phone, they've been deleting them. This had two effects. The one they wanted was that other people might leave other messages that they could create stories from. The real effect that disgusted everybody was it gave her family false hope. This was at the time they didn't know what had happened. And they were given to believe that because messages were disappearing out of the voicemail box, that might actually be the actions of Millie. Now, I asked Dan over Twitter, where did the idea come from? And he pointed me at Melissa Harrison, the Z Factor, who'd been disgusted as we all were, and had been talking to some of her contacts about, well, what can we do about this? And they come up with the idea, well, where do you hit a corporation? In its wallet. Where does the news of the world make its money? It's not really very much from people going out and buying copies of the newspaper. Most newspapers give away more copies than they sell. It's from the people advertising. So she picked up a list of 17 advertisers. She tweeted them all. I must apologize for this slide. One, because my web design is appalling. And two, because my web design is appalling, it doesn't screenshot very well. But I took her list of 17 tweets and I ran it through a 10-line Perl script, which encoded it to use Twitter's most simple API. This is the one where you just create a link, which fills in the box at the top of the web page that you would normally type into, and then you can just push the button and tweet it. I did this because the conversation came up that lots of people were just hitting retweet. It's really easy. You see something on Twitter that you agree with, just hit the retweet button. Yay! But there was a real worry that this wasn't going to show up the real depth of feeling with these advertisers, that depending on what social media monitoring software they were using, that retweets might be a lesser kind of pressure. So came up with this. I discovered that she'd been dealing with these two dubious characters, Andy Dawson and Paul Friend, who'd done the research. They'd actually, gone and opened a copy of the paper to see who was advertising in it, because obviously you couldn't see, online exactly what was going on there. And then, so overnight, as the morning of the 5th of July, it started making a bit of ground. And one of the reasons was actually retweets, but not of the tweets of the advertisers, but tweets about going to the page as ugly as it was. And some of the people who did were Ben Goldacre, John Prescott, Al Murray, Sue Perkins, Amanda Iannucci, Alan Davis, and then you'd love to think on the next slide is His Royal Highness Stephen Fry, but I think I'm probably quite glad it wasn't. I'm not sure my web server would have coped. At this point, of course, this was just a storm in Twitter. Not really important. What has Twitter ever really changed? So then it started appearing in the real world. Well, not the really real world, forums and blogs and things. First one was Not the Talk, which is a bunch of people who used to use Guardian Unlimited Talk, and when they shut that down, set up their own site to carry on that community. Second was quite strange. It was Empire magazine. Somebody on there had been in just a random discussion thread on their discussion forums, had talked about it. And then came the big bad Mumsnet. Now, as you know, every politician in this world dreads the biscuit question from Mumsnet. Later on, some of the reporters suggested that this was their campaign, but they were very gracious in pointing out that obviously they were just pointing out something else that was going on. Then turned up on The Guardian. They were running a live blog on the whole scandal, Roy Greenslade wrote a page on his blog about what you could, as a member of the general public, could do about it, and linked to the campaign. Brand Republic got involved. This was all about brands. This was talking to advertisers. They were really good in spotting exactly what responses were coming back. Made it really easy looking at their live blog to work out which advertisers needed a bigger kick up the arse to do something. And then since I didn't get a retweet from Stephen Fry, my little great thing was having been described as having a bizarre Twitter name by Rory Cellan-Jones on his blog on the BBC News website. Then these guys got involved. Again, they're just blogs. But Liberal Conspiracy and Political Scrapbook have a bit more of a background in what you might call how the old ways of things work. Their idea was, well, let's find the phone numbers for the PR companies that work for these advertisers. Let's actually phone their press offices, ring them up and ask them, have you seen what's going on Twitter? What are you going to do about it? And actually finding out from those that had remained silent whether they were going to do anything. And if they weren't going to do anything, making sure it was perfectly clear that these advertisers had made a statement along the lines of, well, we don't think there's anything wrong with this. A few numbers. The peak, which was actually the morning of the 5th, the site was getting 11,000 page views an hour. In the 2.5 days between the campaign starting and ending, because in some term or other you might think the ending of the newspaper might be considered, if not a nasty victory, a victory, we got 200,000 page views, and that's the number of tweets. We're still counting, because it's actually quite difficult to go back when you haven't thought in advance about doing exit tracking and all kinds of exciting software to work out how many tweets have been done. Twitter don't really make it easy, but we have got somebody who's going through and trying to pull this out. The story, of course, is still going on. The problem we've got is that Millie was a really great spark, to go back to the fire-starting metaphor. People in the real world stopped thinking this as just a bit of fuss that was happening amongst the political classes or a few celebrities that in any way will quite happily flash their knickers to paparazzi. They were just having some gossip stolen. No, this was actually affecting people like them. Now, the scandal is, as I said, still going on. It was a big thing earlier on this week that the Met were going to use the Official Secrets Act to try and get sources that led to some of this stuff coming out from The Guardian. And quite rightly, everybody made their fuss. The other thing that people keep talking about is what next? Well, this man has reinvented himself as a digital warrior, and especially and also was the star of the select committee hearings, and he has said there is a lot more nasty stuff to come out. He reckons the next big thing is that they weren't just looking at people's listening to people's voicemail. They've been reading people's emails. They've been using actual computer hacking, Trojan horses, etc., in order to get into the communications of people. So we don't know what's happening next, but what I'd like to hope is that when we find out about it, everybody makes a fuss. Everybody stands up and says, this is not acceptable behaviour. Thank you.